Welcome to the College Football Rewind. I'm excited for the two semifinal matchups. Indiana, Oregon, Miami against Ole Miss. Can't wait to break it down here for you, giving my picks. Miami and Ole Miss will open up the first one at the Fiesta Bowl on Thursday night. Miami, of course, coming off that big win against Ohio State, where Miami just absolutely dominated in the trenches in that game. And then you get an Ole Miss team comes in firing again on all cylinders. Trinidad Chambliss was the best player on the field against that Georgia team and Kirby Smart's defense that everybody raved and haunted about, especially myself. I did really good in my picks. I did have Miami. The only game I did lose, I did not have Ole Miss beating Georgia at all. I thought, missing Lane Kiffin in that game would finally catch up to him. It did not. Credit Charlie Weiss Jr. because I thought Charlie Weiss Jr. called a fantastic game offensively for Ole Miss. It'll be really interesting to see this week because Lane Kiffin, Charlie Weiss Jr. is going to still be there to call the offense. Still not decided yet if all the other coaches on that staff offensively are going back to LSU. The contract says they got to go back, so rumors have it saying Lane's going to say, Charlie Weiss Jr., you stay and call the plays. Everybody else has got to come back down the Baton Rouge, so we'll see how that plays out. At the time of me recording this, they still hadn't made a decision, so we'll see what happens there. And then on Friday night at 7:30, the rematch, Indiana and Oregon. Indiana, for sure, to me, look like the best team in this playoff on offense, defense, running, passing, you name it. They looked really good. Give credit to Dan Lanning in Oregon, though. They looked really good against that Texas Tech, who Dan Lanning all week, the Ducks heard about how good that front four was for Texas Tech. They dominated Texas Tech. Texas Tech could not do anything offensively against the Ducks in that game. So now we'll get the two big matchups. The winners punch their ticket to play for the national championship. Both of these lines are really low lines. Miami and Ole Miss. Ole Miss is a 3.5-point underdog in that game. And then Friday night, that matchup with Oregon and Indiana. Oregon right now is plus 4.5, two low lines. Tough to beat a team twice. Can that Cinderella story of Kurt Cignetti, Mendoza, the coach of the year, the Heisman Trophy candidate, rags to riches with Indiana, basketball school, football school. Cignetti, the story goes on and on. Could they do it and punch their ticket to play for a national championship? I want to start with Miami and Ole Miss first. Just some keys, I think, to that game for both these teams. Number one, it's going to be who can establish the run game the best in that matchup. Miami combined against Texas A&M and Ohio State. I thought this was a really big number. 65 carries in both of those games combined, over 300 yards. They averaged over 5.5 yards per carry. Ole Miss not very good against a run. They're 65th in the nation. They're giving up over 146 yards a game. The thing I was really surprised with about Ole Miss against Georgia was it was a shootout. It was back and forth. But Ole Miss's defense, when they needed to make a big play, they made the play. They got the turnovers when they needed it. Yes, they gave up some yardage, but deep down, when they needed that play, somebody made a play, for the Rebels in Ole Miss. So we'll see how Ole Miss does against the run game of Miami, and Miami is going to run the football. Mark Fletcher Jr. and Shamar Brown were fantastic against the Buckeyes in running the ball. That fourth quarter drive where they just pounded the football on the ground and pushed Ohio State around. I think that's what Miami is going to look to do coming out in this game. And if Miami can dominate the trenches in this game as well, they're going to win the football game, because I don't know if Miami is going to be able to keep up with Ole Miss, because if this is like a basketball game where this is an up and down style of play, it's going to favor Ole Miss. And I think Ole Miss can put the points on the board to beat Miami. So Miami's going to have to control the tempo. And how do you do that? You run the football. And as I said, they're built from the inside out defensively. In both the games against A&M and Ohio State, 12 sacks. And here's the big number for me, 16 tackles for a loss in both of those games. And I know people say, well, maybe A&M wasn't that good. A&M defensively was really good. Ohio State, all you heard about all season was Matt Patricia, the genius, and that Ohio State defense, the best in the country. They had no answer for the run game of Miami in that game. And that's ended up being the deciding factor. So how do you control pace? You slow the game down. You pound the football. Carson Beck, I think, has just got to be okay. I don't think he can turn the ball over. How well can they handle the ball security? They have had 4 fumbles in a couple of the playoff games for Miami. So can Ole Miss create turnovers, and can they capitalize off the turnovers in that game? So Ole Miss right now, this is another huge stat. They're averaging 74 plays per game, which is one of the tops in the country. 74 plays a game. And the other thing is Miami, they don't really sub a lot. They play a lot of the same guys. They're going to have to sub. They're going to have to see how good that depth is at Miami in the trenches because there's no way 74 plays a game for Ole Miss. Those starters are going to be really tired for Miami. They're going to need them on the field at all times. So they're going to have to rotate some players in and out of that game. And who can win on third down? Miami, Texas A&M, another good stat line here. Texas A&M and Ohio State on third down, they were combined 11 for 28. That's 39%. So they were really good on third down, and Ole Miss struggled on third down. They were just 8 of 24 in their games, so 33% for them. So who's going to be able to get off the field on third down? And we know what a lot of these teams like to do when it's third and long. They love to get after the quarterback. And how well can they get after the quarterback? Carson Beck's been sacked 10 times this season. He does have the 27 touchdowns. He's turned it over at times. He's got 10 interceptions on the season. If he can be clean, they can keep him clean in the pocket. I think Miami's got a really good chance at this game. And many people would say, and including myself, it's kind of like Ohio State last year. Ohio State loses the Big Ten championship game last year. They lose to Michigan, and then they get in as one of the at-large teams. And what do? They went on a magical run in the playoff, and they went on to win the national championship. And many are going to say, well, again, Miami didn't belong in. Notre Dame belonged in. Notre Dame belonged in, but Notre Dame didn't belong in over Miami because of the head-to-head. So Notre Dame fans don't have any argument to say they belonged in over Miami. They did not belong in over Miami. Did they belong in over a Tulane? Yes. Did they belong in over a James Madison? Yes. Did they belong in over an Alabama team that already had 3 losses? Yes, but not over Miami. So that's on them. That's not anything to do with Miami. So Miami gets in, and all they hear about is, well, you didn't belong in the dance. Well, they're in the dance, and I think they got a really good shot to win this whole thing. And I said that 2 weeks ago when all this playoffs was going down and we saw the brackets. I said Miami can easily punch their ticket and win this whole thing, just how they're built. And I think the young freshman phenom receiver, Malachi Tony's been sensational. They find ways to get him the football. I think they said he's like 18 years old out there, but he's over 1,000 yards on the season. He's going to have to be big for Carson Beck down the field. And I think that run game of Mark Fletcher, who's just under 1,000 yards, can they pound the football with Fletcher and Sharmar Brown, who's just over 400 yards rushing as well? They love to hand it off. So we'll see on the Miami front what they can do. And then I think it's real simple for Ole Miss. You get Trinidad Chambliss going. If you can get him in the pocket, get him out of the pocket, get him out there in space, get it to your playmakers. They got 3 solid wide receivers with Wallace and Striblin and Deuce Alexander. And then can they get the beast Keywan Lacey going in the backfield, who's a 1,400-yard back? They love to pound the football. So I think it's going to be an up and down. It's going to be that Ole Miss offense against that Miami defense, that Miami front that's been really good. At the end of the day, who do I think wins in this game? Listen, I think all these 4 teams that are left have great stories. I think the Ole Miss storyline still with Lane Kiffin, and then now these offensive coaches potentially going to LSU, leaving them without X amount of coaches. I think that's a storyline. Trinidad Chambliss came back and said he's going to stay at Ole Miss after the season, win or lose, which I think is a home run for Ole Miss. And then I think you look at Miami and you say, well, they're the team that got in. They're the team nobody thought would get in, got in, and now they're making a huge run where they can win a national championship. And then you flip it to like the Indiana, the stories we've all talked about, the Signetti, the coach, the Mendoza, who wins the Heisman Trophy. They win the Big Ten championship. They're the number 1 seed. All we've heard about is Signetti in Indiana the last 2 years. They're America's team. That's a great story. And then again, you got Dan Lanning just sitting there saying, everybody's talking about everybody else. Why isn't anybody talking about the Ducks? Again, I said this before. The Ducks are a really dangerous team. Dante Moore, Arguably, you could say it's either him or Mendoza 1, 2 in the NFL draft. We'll see how that plays out. He can make every throw on the field. They're tough up front. They can run the football. They can play really good defense. They hung with Indiana the first time down in Eugene. Now you get on a neutral field. You never know what could happen. So I think there's a lot of good storylines. But for me, the first game, I'm going to ride Mario Cristobal in Miami. I'm going to ride the U. I got Miami 26-17 over Ole Miss, but I would not be surprised if Ole Miss continues to find a way to win these football games and that storyline continues. But I like the U. I think they punched their ticket to play for the national championship. Let's move on to Friday night's game, the Peach Bowl, where Oregon is a 4.5-point underdog of this one. This game is Friday night at 7:30. I think it's going to come down to a handful of things. How well can Indiana run the ball against that Oregon front? As I said, Oregon reminds me a lot of Miami in the trenches. And I look at all four of these teams, probably outside of Ole Miss. How have they won their playoff games? They run the football, they stop the run, they play really good defense, and they're really good on third down. Indiana hasn't had a tough game since I think the Penn State game where Mendoza makes the unbelievable throw and the kid makes a heck of a catch, taps his toe in the back of the end zone, and they go on and beat Penn State, which I thought was a fantastic game to watch, probably one of the best games, if not the best game of the season. So how well can Indiana handle that Oregon rush defense? And I think for Oregon, it's going to be real easy. Can you get the Mendoza? Can you frustrate him? Can you get him out of the pocket? Can you make them turn the ball over? They're about as disciplined team as I've seen in the last 10, 15 years. They don't make a lot of mistakes. They can win different ways. They can pound the football. They can throw the football. They're really good in the red zone. So it's going to depend on how well Oregon can at least frustrate or get to Mendoza. The other thing, I think it's Oregon. Can they run the ball against that Indiana defense? Indiana does not give up a lot of yards on the ground, one of the best defenses in the entire country. So we'll see if Oregon can do that. And then I said, how well can Oregon disrupt Mendoza in the pocket? Can they make him rattled in the pocket? Can they hit him early in the game? I go back to the Indiana and Ohio State game in the Big Ten title game. I think it was like the third or fourth play in the first series of that game. Ohio State blasted him on a run. I thought they knocked him out of the game. I had messaged my wife and said, "Oh, there you go. Ohio State fans are going to catch a break because Mendoza's going to get knocked out of the game." I think he sat out 2 plays and came back in, and the rest was history in that game. So can they hit him enough, and can they stop that Indiana run offense? Because again, when I look at Hemby, I look at Kalon Black, both of them just under 200 carries for the season between two of them. That's a lot of carries. Roman Hemby's the one that's over 1,000 yards. They got Kalon Black that's just under 900 yards, both of them with a lot of carries. And when you try to stop the run game, it frees up Omar Cooper and Elijah Surratt too with the passing game. So I think it should be a really good game. I think should be a fun game. I think if I had to pick, I think I'm going to lean in right now. I'm going to go with Indiana. I think the storyline's fantastic. I'm gonna ride with Indiana in this game. I'm gonna roll probably. I hadn't really given a score. I'm gonna say maybe 27-23. 27-23. I think it's going to be a close game. I know a lot of the experts are saying it should probably be a double-digit win for Indiana. It could be. I think they're better than the first time these two teams played, but I think Oregon's a lot better too. And I think Oregon, like Dan Lanning, it's always got a chip on his shoulder. And I think Oregon likes to play the underdog where nobody's going to pick them. He's going to use the mentality it's everybody against their world, and all you hear about is this Indiana team and how great this team is. And I think that's going to frustrate Dan Lannon. So we'll see. I know he'll have the guys ready to play, but there you have it. I'm going to roll with Indiana and Miami. I think should be a really fun matchup to watch them play for the national championship. Tune in. Make sure Thursday night is the first game, the Fiesta Bowl. Friday night's the Peach Bowl. And then later on this week, I'll get set to air my interview with Coach Nowicki to talk about Rome Free Academy Black Knights hockey, as they were my team of the month for the month of December from the Rockpile Sports Network. So thanks for tuning in tonight to the College Football Rewind. Enjoy the games this week. We'll talk to you again soon here on the Rockpile Sports Network. Have a good evening.